about me. Actually, it's very exciting to be here because actually was an FAU student many years ago. So about 20 years ago, I was actually an FAU student. It's like nice to be back on the home grounds. You heard a little bit earlier, my name is Joy Lainez, and I'm currently the district team leader of Target Corporation, or as you guys probably refer to it, Target. I have been with Target for 22 years, so I've had a long history and have, learned a lot about myself through that process as a leader and as a person. Right now, my team is close to 3,000 people, and I have about $350 million worth of volume that I'm responsible for. So it's a big job. I'm going to tell you, it keeps me very, very busy, but I feel very gratified in the work that I do each and every day. And so one of the things we want to talk about today was leadership, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about being a leader with Target and what that's like. Before I do that, just so you connect to me a little bit more, I want to tell you about my personal life a little bit. I'm married. I have a wonderful husband. His name is Xavier. And I've got to tell you, he's the complete polar opposite of me, and sometimes I think that makes for the most successful relationships, especially if you're a very driven woman. So when we're walking out to the car, I'm like on the iPad, and he's like, wow, look at the sky, Joy. So we're complete opposites, but that balances us very, very well, and so I have to say that I'm very, very happily married. And I have two very grown, beautiful stepsons, and one of them actually goes to FAU. His name is Carlos Lainez. So one goes here at FAU, and then my older stepson is still in Ecuador, which is the country that my husband is from. So that's a little bit about me personally in my personal life. Outside of Target, I also do sit on the hands-on Broward on the board of directors with Ms. Val. So that's how Val and I met. So I've been on that board for a couple of years now, and very, very gratifying work. I mean, Hands-on Broward connects volunteers to great projects, and to be part of that and help people learn how to volunteer and learn to be volunteer and project leaders is great, very, very gratifying. With Target, I also do a lot of community building within Target. If you know anything about Target and you shop with them, we give $4 million back every single week in our local communities. And on top of that, our big goal right now is to give $1 billion back to education by the end of 2015. So that grant giving and that volunteerism takes a lot of my personal time. So that's just a little bit about the Target piece. For me personally, thinking about how my career started and me a little bit as a leader, when I was your age, and I was actually working full-time at Burdines. Anybody ever heard of Burdines department stores? So the Florida store goes way, way back. And I actually started my career as a gift wrapper. I was a young girl paying her way through for her tuition in college, and I was wrapping my way through my career path. And I worked with, 4 beautiful retired women that I have to tell you probably formed the lady that you're talking to today, or listening to today. They helped me grow up, and I was probably 16, 17 years old, spending every day with them, and somehow through my work ethic and my ability to relate to others and my ability to balance my college and my job, I got promoted. I was 19 years old, and I was the youngest executive at Burdines. And so all of a sudden I went from, wrapping gifts to leading people. It was really, and leading some people that were my friends and people that I was very, very close to. And that was probably one of the first steps for me of learning about being a leader and changing kind of the way that I lead, because all of a sudden I had to change who I was as a person, but still maintain those relationships. So, great experiences with Burdines, and through that I learned that there are 7 really big pieces to leadership, and these are the ones that I want to share with you today, are the 7 key pieces. The first and most important one to me is that you have to be able to connect to people. So this for me is a very an easy one, because I relate well, I inspire people easily, and that is what really has made the difference for me. I can relate to any type of person, any age, any diversity. It's very, very easy for me to see the value in people, and something that as a leader is very, very important. So that first is to know your team, connect to your team, and make sure your team knows a little bit about you. The second thing that you have to do when you're a leader is you have to set expectations. So sometimes this is hard, and you talked a lot about goal planning now, but setting expectations is the same thing. When you get in your new role, you have to sit back and reflect and find out from your boss and what's expected of you, and then you have to set those expectations for your team. And you have to be very, very clear with your team of what those expectations are and how you're going to get there. But if you go in and you're not setting expectations, you're not not going to make the progress that you need to. So once you've connected with them, you tell them what's expected. Then the next piece, and this is a component that was probably very, very important to me, is teaching, training, and developing. So when I originally went to school, my goal was to be a teacher. I wanted to be out there teaching people, mentoring people, kind of making a difference in the world. And what I learned through my career in retail is I'm just doing it with my students a little bit older. Because in reality, when you work in retail, you think, I mean, I think when you guys think about Target, you probably said, what does she do? Does she push a shopping cart, or does she ring register? Because that's what you think Target is, because that's all that you see. You don't think about the size of the teams or the amount of managers it takes to run a building like that. So the third component of teaching, training, and developing, that is the one that is key, because you are connecting to your team and then you're teaching them how to get those expectations that you just set. It is the best part of my job. So when you're walking the sales floor and I'm talking to my team, and like this week I was visiting stores and it's right before Easter. So I'm teaching my teams why it's so important to keep Easter, get all those chocolate bunnies on the floor so that you guys can buy them for your Easter baskets, and connecting how much we're going to do in sales and how important those sales are to our organization. So taking the time to teach, train, and develop is how you really get that buy-on for your team. The fourth one is being vulnerable, and this is like a big one. So when people get into their first leadership role, you want to be the boss and you want to be in charge. And something that you have to understand to be in charge is that you have to be vulnerable. We're human. I make mistakes all the time, right? And sometimes as leaders, if we pretend we're the boss and we have all the answers, you don't gain respect that way. I mean, you gain respect by being open, by asking for feedback. I ask for feedback from my team all the time. My team knows what I'm working on. So if you haven't picked it up yet, my opportunity is communicating effectively. And where that stands is I talk very fast. Am I doing it today? Am I talking too fast? So I tend to talk very, very fast. So I have to tell my team that. So when I go to visit my store and I got these people around me, I watch, are they like nodding? So you're writing down, so I'm thinking you can follow me. I'm looking for those signs. But to me as a leader, you have to be vulnerable and tell your team that. So, hey, you guys, sometimes I talk fast. So if you need me to repeat something, ask. Because you have to realize that for them, it could be intimidating to ask me that question. I mean, I have a big job and a lot of people work for me, so they could be intimidated. So by being vulnerable, I strengthen that connection with my team, which makes them more comfortable to ask me those questions. Make sense? So then, after being vulnerable, the next one is following up. Okay, so now you have taken the time to connect with your team, you've set the expectations, you taught them whatever it was that they needed to know to do their job. You've asked them for feedback, so you've given them every opportunity to succeed. Now it's your time to follow up on that and see, are you getting to where you need to be, right? Asking questions, following up specifically on the roles that you gave them. Now, number 6 is the hardest one. So number 6, and this is where I'll be honest with you, when I was a young leader in my first role, this is where I struggled. And number 6 is addressing performance when it's not meeting those expectations. So when I came in as a new leader, my goal was to have everybody be happy on my team. So if it meant that I worked later, or if somebody called in, I covered gift wrap, or somebody slowed down, I'd speed up. In reality, what that did was that made me work harder, but it didn't strengthen my team. So when it came to having to address performance with people that I got close to, that was tough for me at first. I have to close that door and say you're not meeting expectations, and again, you're setting the expectations, you're telling them how to do it. So when they're in, you're following up, and if they're not getting there, at some point you've got to close that door and you've got to say it. I think for me, when I look at the journey of my career, that is where I learned that about the point I was a store manager. So when I was an executive running an area like hard lines or a clothing area, I could cover my team. So I could get out there and work harder, work faster, make my area look good, and nobody would catch me. I could catch it. But when I got to the point that I was a store manager and I had a couple hundred people beneath me and I had this 200,000 square foot building, I couldn't. Like, if people didn't do their jobs, I couldn't cover that. And for me, that was probably the biggest transition in my position, was that I learned by delegating to people and by giving them the autonomy, it inspired them. So what I always thought would be a negative thing, I thought, oh, they're going to love me because I work hard and I'm working by their side, and all of a sudden I'm asking them to do things, what I realized in that moment was I developed them, and I engaged them, and I inspired them, because now all of a sudden they were feeling good about the job they were doing, they were getting recognized, and they were growing and developing. So to me, number 6, addressing poor performers or people that aren't performing is the hardest part of it for a new leader. And I think anytime, and you guys are in clubs all the time, and I know you guys do all kinds of group projects, and there's probably somebody on your project team that doesn't pull their weight. It's like the #1 interview question that when I'm interviewing people right out of college, and you say, tell me about a time when someone on your group didn't pull their weight, you guys almost always go to a school project where there's 6 of you on the project, and 5 of you want to do it, and 1 doesn't, and 9 times out of 10, you guys figure out how to work around that 1 individual that doesn't pull their weight, right? But in reality and in the business world, and when you're the boss, that 1 person that doesn't pull their weight has got to be addressed, because you are not successful as a high-level leader without every single member on your team being successful. So that's the key piece. So really thinking through how you would do that. And I think when it comes to having to give people tough feedback or hold people accountable, my way of thinking about that is you have to be transparent. So I am extremely transparent with my team. I can't tell you the last time I actually had to say to somebody, you're fired. And the reason why is that at the point that somebody is failing at their job, I have been so honest and so transparent that 9 times out of 10 they resign. Now, in my world, reality, that's success, because if I fire someone, they're going out there and they might not have food on the table for their kids, they might not be able to make their bills, but if somebody knows it's coming because they're just not able to do the job, then I know they're out there looking for a job, and that makes me feel better. So I think when we think about giving people criticism, we think about holding people accountable, you have to think about if it was you. So if you were on my team and your paycheck paid the bills every day, it put the food on the table for your children, would you want to know what is coming? Would you want to know you're struggling, or would you want it to be a surprise? You want to know it's coming, right? So I think when we think about giving that feedback and when we think about holding people accountable, that's the key piece we have to remember. It's respectful to be honest with them. It's respectful to be transparent with them. You're first, you want to help them through it. You want to teach and train and develop them and help them get there. But if you can't, and there'll be those that you can't, you want to make sure you're at least honest through it. Does that make sense? So after we've addressed where performance isn't meeting expectations, the last thing we want to do is, for everyone who was successful, we want to recognize and we want to celebrate. And I can't tell you how important recognition is. And to me, you can't recognize at the end. You've got to recognize the small successes as you go along. You also have to make sure that your recognition is very genuine, and not everybody likes to be recognized the same way. And you'll have people on your team or that you're working with that love the high five or that love recognition in group, and then you'll have people that don't want to be recognized in group and rather get a letter to the home or a gift card. I mean, everybody's different. I think as a leader, it's your job to figure out how to motivate and recognize those individuals. They're not all going to change to your style. You've got to be able to change and figure out their style. So I think that's a very, very important part of keeping people engaged. So when I reflect on my years, I really feel that I've become exactly what I wanted to become, and I'm a teacher. And when I think about, a store team leader that currently works for me, and his name is Brian. And when Brian joined my team, he was with me about 12 years. And when he joined my team, he was an entry-level team member. And he got to a team lead position, sort of like an hourly leader position. He was making about $12 an hour. And I watched Brian go from that team leader position to his first position as executive, and then his second and third, and watched him develop. And he got up to being a store team leader. So he literally, in my eyes, went from making $12 an hour, where I was like beating him up because he'd come into work with his pants wrinkled, and he had an attitude, he liked to be late. And I developed him, and I invested in him, and then I watched him become a store manager where he's making well over a 6-figure salary. So here I've watched him, and although the money and the success is the greatest part, it's always the great part, right? But the real true connection is, in that 12 years, I watched Brian get married. I watched Brian have not 1, not 2, but 4 kids. I was there when Brian's mother passed away. I was part of that. And I really became a mentor in Brian's life, right? So I was part of that. And so that's the part about retail that when you see Target, and you see the shopping carts, and you see the, thinking that we registers, that's what you don't understand. We impact people every single day. And I know in the bottom of my heart that Brian not only is a better leader because of me, but Brian's a better father, Brian's a better son, he is a better friend, and straight out he's a better person because of the time that I invested with him. So when I think about my style, and my style is very commitment versus compliance, and I know there's all different types of leadership styles. And to me, commitment takes a lot more time to really do those 7 steps and get to know your team and recognize them and really set expectations. That's commitment leadership. That takes time. Compliance leadership is power. It's easy power, demand what you want done, but the results don't always stay there and the team isn't always happy. So when I think back to my years, I probably gave more hours than I should have, and I probably worked harder than I should have, but in reality, I led with commitment, and in reality, I led with my heart. So that's just a little bit about my style, and I wanted to open it up and see if you guys had any questions, and I'm an open book, you can ask me anything. Go.
How do you deal with when say you're in a meeting with multiple store managers or other district managers? How do you deal with the power struggle when everybody wants to be in charge, everybody wants to be the leader, and instead of being a team player?
And I think if it's in that room and everybody, at some point you have to cut that off. I think by giving people different roles and responsibilities, though, and then keeping them focused on what their core roles are. So if I'm with store managers and they all want to, bring up something different, but isolating what they're responsible for and isolating what they're talking about in the meeting. Because to your point, sometimes you have a lot of type A's together and you have to get control of that room. So, and even to the point that you might say, okay, so let's hear what Joe has to say, or find yourself asking the questions and make yourself ask the people maybe that aren't talking to kind of balance the room a little bit. I know that type A though, I got them all on my team, so. What else? Yeah.
If you have a person you have to continuously motivate them to where it's getting to be too much, where do you, when do you address the question of if they really want to be there, or if they because if they start to be a burden to, let's say, the team,
Yep.
where you constantly have to motivate them to do everything, where do you, when do you address that?
Okay, well I think the key is remember, if there's somebody on your team that's a burden to you, chances are everybody that's working around them is disengaged because they're watching this person, whether you're leading them or not, but they're watching this person be able to do things that they're not able to do, right? And then that makes the way people see you as a leader, it blurs that quite a bit. So I think the first reaction for me is I think anytime somebody is doing something, you have to address it. So I'm just going to pick attendance, okay? So if Joe works in my store and Joe is late for work, the first time I think the leader needs to pull him aside, and it doesn't, not a mountain at a molehill, just say, Joe, listen, you know what, you were 15 minutes late for work today, and you need to be at work on time. And give him the reasons why. Because you were late, Betty couldn't get, to pick up her son at school, and, we have some merchandise in the back that needs to get to the floor, and kind of just connect it to him, right? So then, and then you document that. And this is further as you become a leader, and then you're like, okay, on January 1st, I told Joe not to be late to work, have that conversation. So now it's January 10th, and Joe's late again, right? So at this time, you still don't want to make it, what you don't want to do is go, dude, you're late. You want to actually address it, but you got to be careful, because if you make everything a mountain out of a molehill, then your team doesn't like you as leader either, so you got to balance that, right? So I would pull Joe aside, and maybe you take him off stage a little bit, not behind closed doors, but off stage. You go, Joe, now you start doing things like using the date. Remember on January 1st, I talked to you about being late? So all of a sudden he's going, like, why is she remembering specifics, right? So remember on January 1st, I talked about being late? Like now it's 9 days later and you're late again. And you know what? I explained to you that Betty has to go pick up her kid, and it's making us fall behind. You need to understand, this is the second time I've talked to you about it. It's not okay. The third time, it is behind closed doors. That door is shut, and you're like, Joe, listen. So I think you can't let it go on. I think the biggest thing as a new and a young leader is you cannot put anything under that carpet, because once you first come into a position of a group leader or a leadership position, if you ignore things, your team catches up on that immediately, and it'll take a long time for you to turn that around. So from day one, you have to address, and you have to give criticism, and you have to say things, but you have to be very, very careful how you do it, because they haven't earned your respect yet. You know what I mean? You haven't earned it with them yet. So you have to do it very, saying it, but saying it in a way where they want to work for you. But by the second, if you've done it twice, by the third time, it's got to go behind closed doors. Go ahead.
So if there's that makes sense, kind of like a 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing. But if there's a person that's even more above you who would potentially have the power to fire them. Like, let's say you're just like the middleman
Yep.
who's like above them, but you can't like fire them. Like, is that it comes to a point where you ask them like how serious they are about the position, because you can't like do anything about firing them. I don't know
Well, I
if
feel
you
like
would
the
take it
person
up with,
above
like,
you should be so have you gone to the person above you and talked about like, hey, so-and-so continues to do whatever it is, and we need some help as a team? Have you done that? I think that's the first step. I think it's okay though if somebody to say to him, listen, like let him know how it affects you, whatever they're doing, how it's affecting you through that. But then if it doesn't get better by you being transparent, saying this is what we're feeling, I think at that part you need to go to the boss.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think she was first though.
Oh, okay.
As the leader though, how do you, because the workplace has become like a very stressful place lately for a lot of people, where you have to stick to a schedule and the performance and quotas and all that. So sometimes for leaders it's difficult to keep up their morale because people get lost in their jobs and they get very stressed out. Like, how do you strike a balance? Because you don't want to make it too much fun where people start locking off, and you don't want to make it too strict where people just lose interest and the love for the job.
Totally agree. I think the biggest piece of that first is if you don't have the right members at all levels. So if you have people like the person she's talking about, realizing that, because everyone is, payroll is tight, people are doing more with less in every organization, every kind of company, right? So if there are people on the team that are not pulling their weight, that will immediately affect morale. So the biggest thing is having the right team, right? So that's why I say don't not address anything. That is the key to everything. But I think once you have the right team, I think it's about, because the reality is companies expect a lot. I mean, I work hard, there's really high expectations working for me and working for Target, but I think I balance that. So you have to balance that with making sure you're recognizing them, and a lot of it is that connection and vulnerability that you talk about. Like, I will go in my stores and I will huddle up. I mean, I talk to every level. I talk to my overnight team members that unload trucks, like every level, and connecting what they do to the purpose is very, very important, because if they don't know why they're stocking the Easter candy this weekend, but if they know it's going to be phenomenal sales, and sales give us more payroll hours, which gives us more jobs and more hours, then you have to like connect that for them. You also have to get them excited about the company, and if you're working for, like, I'm very blessed to work for Target, so we've got great volunteers, we've got great benefits, there's all these great things that I have to sometimes connect the purpose of the company, and then I think you have to connect the purpose of the leader. So me being a commitment versus compliance leader, I talk to my team all the time. I'm like, if you need me, man, you come talk to me. I mean, I have an extremely open door culture, and again, I will say, that makes me work more hours, but out of my choice of the way that I lead. But if you looked at like engagement of my teams, and I'll openly share, my store manager engagement was 100%, which means 100% of my store managers engaged. My executive ranks, so my ETLs that run the leaders in the building, it was at 95% last year, which is really high. My hourly team leaders, so my hourly level leaders, was at 83, which is very high. And then my team members, which I want 100%, and my goal this year is 80%, but last year was at 75%. So when you think of that, out of thousands of team members, 75% can clearly say they're engaged in their job and they intend to stay. That's great. You want more, you always want more, but I think you have to do things to try to measure where your team is at, and then I think you have to react to what their needs are. So a lot of the needs are things like communication, recognition. Like, I think you have to facilitate and ask for feedback from your teams, and then make sure that you're holding hold my store managers accountable to making sure those team members get what they want. And that's how you build happy teams. And I think you put things in perspective. Like, when I walk around my stores, I don't think about my team as thousands of people and $350 million of business. If I did that, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. Like, this is like a little bit too overwhelming for me. I think I sell toothpaste for a living. Like, that's what I say to my students. Okay, we sell toothpaste for a living. Like, how difficult should this be? And you have to try to make that environment fun. So.
You spoke about different mentors that helped you throughout your path of becoming a leader, and yet yourself, you were a mentor as well. At this point in time, after being a leader, do you have a mentor now?
I do. I actually, I have several different kinds of mentors. I mean, in some ways, Val is a mentor to me. She kind of keeps me in line. But I do. I actually have a group director who is out of the Orlando market, who at this point in my career, I don't want to go any further. Like, I love my team. I want to be near my team. I think the higher you go up in the corporate ladder, just the further you get away from the stores. And that's really where I excel. But doesn't mean I can't still get better as a leader. So I do. I have a mentor that actually I speak a lot. I'm speaking at FAU actually on April 18th, and I'll like send him stuff and ask him for feedback. He'll be the person, to be honest, that when I'm having tough times, I'll be open and honest with, and they, kind of offsets and puts me back in perspective. And I think there are many different kinds of mentors. I think you need mentors that are just people that you can just talk to, and when you need to go below the line or you're having a bad day, this person picks you up. And then there are mentors that are really good, that give you really good feedback. There could be mentors that are good at your strength, because sometimes people look for mentors that are really good at what they do. So if I struggle with communicating effectively, they look for a mentor that's great at communicating effectively. But on the flip side, sometimes finding someone who isn't so great at it, that struggled and grown through it, sometimes that's a better mentor. So I think you need a couple in your lives. I really do, for different things. Okay, anything else? Okay. Thank you, guys.